In this session, we're going to focus on judgments. And we start this presentation by addressing the question, what are judgments? And next we proceed to characteristics of judgments, like coloring reality, strengthening duality, limiting reality, and creating conflicts. So these are the 5 topics that we deal with in this presentation. So let's start with the first chapter. What are judgments? Well, judgments are all about evaluation and labeling. When we judge something, we are evaluating something and we're putting a label on that very thing we're judging. For instance, if I judge the clothes that somebody is wearing, I hate his shoes, I like his sweater, we're putting a label on it. We're evaluating it and put a label like beautiful or trendy or not so trendy or whatever on that very thing that we do. So this is a hallmark of judging. In the past, in the last session on automaticity, we talked about automatic behavior following directly without conscious awareness. Well, judging is in fact an example of an automatic process. We automatically judge people often, and it's unconscious. We're doing that without really being aware of it. And a judgment is based on opposites. So for instance, good or bad, beautiful or ugly, desirable or undesirable, pleasant or unpleasant. These are all examples of judgments. And in the literature, this is also referred to as dichotomous thinking, thinking in terms of black and white, which is very common for people who judge a lot, to look at reality from like a dichotomous perspective. For instance, what you see in the eating behavior literature is that some people have really rigid beliefs about beauty in terms of body weight. So you have thin people are good and beautiful, and overweight people are ugly, and high caloric food is bad and low caloric food is not so bad, it's good. So judgment is very at the heart of this example as well. So what are characteristics of a judgment? Well, a judgment colors reality, strengthens duality, limits reality, and creates a conflict. And what I want to do here is discuss each of these characteristics one by one in this presentation. So let's start with the first characteristic, so coloring reality. This is what we're going to discuss here in chapter 2. So judgments operate like a lens, and we see the world through the lens of our judgment. So when we judge something, we actually color reality. We're wearing a lens, we're seeing reality through a lens of our judgment. And the color of the lens is shaped by our beliefs. In other words, the type of judgment that we have is a result of the beliefs that we have. And the lens through which we look at reality influences our experience. In other words, the judgments that we make have a strong impact on how we feel. So let me clarify this by means of a picture. So imagine there is a person, and this person has all kinds of beliefs. Like for instance, like working hard is good, drinking alcohol is bad, thin people are beautiful. I'm just making up something here. Those are all beliefs or norms that this person believes to be true. Well, these beliefs, they are the foundation for the judgment that this person has. So based on these beliefs, he will judge reality in terms of how reality matches these beliefs. And if this person, for instance, who believes that a high salary is an important marker for success, is confronted with a person who has a low salary but spends a lot of time with his kids, he may call this person a loser. So the judgment that follows from his beliefs is he's a loser because this person doesn't match his definition of success, because he believes that in order to call yourself successful, you have to have a high salary, and obviously this person doesn't have a high salary. Now let's take another person, and his beliefs are completely different. This person believes that family is the most important marker of success. He believes that in order to call yourself successful, you have to be like a family man. You have to spend time with your family and so on. Well, if he would see the same person with a low salary but who spends a lot of time with his kids, he may call this person, the very same person, a winner. because this person matches his idea of success. So again, what becomes evident from these examples is that reality is that this person, compared to other people in this country, maybe doesn't make a lot of money, but he spends relatively a lot of time with his kids. This is objective reality. But the judgment is something very subjective. And this is the result of the beliefs that a person has here. So the very same person can be judged completely different by two different individuals. But the same can also apply to ourselves, when we have beliefs like crying is a sign of weakness. When we encounter a situation in which we find ourselves crying because we experience pain, we may judge ourselves like, I am weak. So the judgment follows from our belief that crying is a sign of weakness. And in my own clinical practice, I've seen many people who suffered from these very strict beliefs about weakness and strength and morality and so on. For instance, a client of mine was a young student. She was 20 years of age, and her mother died. And because she was told by her family that crying is indeed a sign of weakness, and this doesn't belong to her family name, this is not something we do here, she actually didn't cry at the funeral of her own mother because she felt really that it was a sign of weakness, and she felt she would let other people down because of it. So you can imagine that the judgment about herself that she had in that very moment was very much shaped by the beliefs that she actually got from her family members when she grew up. So judgments are often a reflection of the beliefs that we have. So when we take these examples, we can conclude that the judgment often says more about the person who makes the judgment than about the person about whom the judgment is made. And when you start realizing this, you also start noticing that in most cases, it doesn't matter so much what people say about you. It's a mere reflection of their own belief system. And the judgment that people have about you and you about other people informs you more about yourself or other people than the judgment does about reality itself. There's a nice experiment that also shows the impact of beliefs on judgment. So in this elegant study, people were invited to the lab and they would be participating in a job interview simulation. So there were like 60 men, and these were all interviewers, so these were the bosses, they played the role of a boss, and 60 women who applied for a certain job. And what they did here, they manipulated the info people got beforehand. Half of the men were told that the female applicant that was about to enter the room was very attracted to him, whereas the other half was not given this information. So what they found was that if the interviewer believed that women felt attracted to them, they showed more flirting behavior. So the mere belief that, the woman that was sitting in front of them felt attractive to them impacted their behavior immediately, even if this wasn't really the case. But more interestingly, when female applicants were approached by the flirting behavior, they also showed more flirting behavior when the interviewer believed that they felt attracted to them. In other words, the behavior of the interviewer that was falsely based on the assumption that the female applicant was attracted to him induced behavior based on his assumptions. So what we see here is what happens in daily reality as well of judgments. With judgments is that because we believe something to be true, we start treating people differently because of that, and those people are also reacting to the treatment that we give. So for instance, if a student enters my room and I believe, based on my beliefs about what a decent student should look like, I judge this student. This student is not wearing very fancy clothes, he's a bit late and so on. And based on all these characteristics in my mind, I come to the conclusion that he's not very suitable for an internship. So I judge this person as not suitable or just, not a good student. And As a result of my judgment, I may interpret everything that follows from everything that follows through this lens that I just created. So for instance, if this student tells me like, okay, there's only one exam that I need to pass, I didn't make it the last time, and so on. Immediately, without knowing the cause for not passing the exam, maybe, he got ill or whatever, I'm not considering this, but it perfectly matches my image of a not successful student. Of course he didn't make it. He probably didn't study hard enough, and so on. So we start to fill in the gaps and we judge based on the initial judgment that we have. And because of that, I start treating the student in a way that is also affecting his behavior. And this is what is shown here in this example as well. When we start believing things, we act upon those beliefs. And our behavior that follows from our beliefs affects the behavior of other people as well. So behavior is guided by the filter through which we look at reality. So we act upon the beliefs that we have. So now let's focus on another characteristic of judgment, namely strengthening duality. What is duality? Well, duality is having two parts with opposite meanings. This is basically what duality is. And duality is at the very core of judgment. And it means a contrast. Duality means black and white, good or bad, and so on. It means that there are opposites. And opposites only exist in relation to each other. So what I want to do before I continue to illustrate these points is to run a small thought experiment with you. I would like you to imagine you were the only person on this planet and this whole universe. So there was nobody else except you. Are you little or tall? Are you good or bad? The goal of this exercise is to show you that opposites only exist in relation to each other. Because when you were answering those questions, you probably came to the conclusion that you just simply cannot tell whether you're good or bad or tall or little or whatever it is. In order to say, I'm good, there must be something that you can call bad. In order to call yourself tall, there must be at least one person that is, less tall than you are. So opposites only exist in relation to each other. And absolutely speaking, nothing is good or wrong. You can only say something is good or wrong if there is something to contrast this statement with. And opposites, things like happiness, sadness, and so on, they make each other possible. Without death, life wouldn't be possible. Without holiday, work wouldn't be possible. Without work, holiday wouldn't be possible. Because this is sometimes a confusion. Because many people, they believe that, oh my God, if I can stop working, finally I will have like a holiday for the rest of my life and so on. The problem is that the experience of having free time, enjoying your leisure time, only exists when there is something that is not leisure time. You can only feel relief when there was tension. You only can experience like freedom when you had to work hard and not experience freedom. So this is why many people, when they stop working, instead of becoming extremely happy, they enter a depressive episode, because there is nothing. The idea of having ultimate freedom and ultimate leisure time is only true when it can be contrasted with something else. So the opposites make each other possible. I always use this metaphor here. It's like a coin, and basically black and white, opposites are part of the same coin. Work is part of the same coin as leisure time. Because there is leisure time, because there is work, you can experience leisure time. Success is only possible when there is failure. Failure is necessary to experience success. And at a very abstract level, we can only perceive a color like blue when there is a color that is not blue, because else everything would be blue. So what does a judgment do? A judgment is actually like a simplification of this whole whole coin process because it focuses only on one of the two halves. So judgment only focuses on one of the two halves, and those two halves are not perceived as independent anymore. So rather than seeing good and bad as part of the same coin, actually they're isolated. So we only focus on, oh my God, this was really bad, and we forget that everything is actually both good and bad at the same time. There is not one thing that applies only. So this is what a judgment do. It isolates reality, and it focuses only on one half of the two parts. So, and if we zoom out and we take a look at the whole coin again, we see that good and bad exist only because of each other. To experience A, we must experience not A. You can never experience something unless there is an opposite experience of that. And ultimately, and this is, of course, for many people, including myself, often a giant leap, but we may be thankful for both bad and good experiences. A nice way to illustrate this last point is by means of a metaphor. Many people who have played video games, specifically in the 80s when the Mario Brothers were released, they know that it could be very frustrating to play Mario Brothers because in this game you had to complete levels, but it was not an easy job. You could fall down a cliff, or you could get hit by some kind of a monster, and sometimes it took a very long time to get to the end of a level. But what many people want in life is that they want a life that is easy. They want actually a life without problems. They want a life that is good and always happy and always, without stress and so on. And if you apply this wish, this judgment about how life should be to this game, it would mean that we play a game in which we are unable to fail. You could reach every level easily without having to make any mistakes or being attacked by anything. But if we would consider the game in that way, it would soon become very boring, obviously. It would become a very boring game to play. And the fact that we, can miserably fail in achieving, and succeeding in this game and fail to reach a certain level makes the game worthwhile. It makes the game so enjoyable, because once we do finish a level, we're proud because we know that we suffered a lot to get there. We worked hard to get there. So the sense of victory is only possible because we also know that we didn't succeed previously. So this metaphor here of this video game is in fact a very valuable realization, I think, for many people, that once life becomes the way we believe it should be and isolate experiences, and we only want the good things in life, life would become very shallow and many experiences wouldn't be possible anymore. Okay, so now let's continue with the next chapter. In this chapter, we focus yet on another characteristic of judgment, which is limiting reality. So judgments limit reality. And we all know reality is extremely complex. There are always many reasons, and sometimes two reasons are true at the same time. And what happens when we judge something, we actually reduce reality by focusing only on one aspect. And what we do when we judge something, actually we say reality is like this, and we only focus on one component. We say this is not good, he's a loser, he's a failure, and so on. And by doing that, I always compare this to putting things in a small box. Reality is a huge, endlessly big box, and by judging something, we actually try to make it fit in one small box that we believe represents reality. And the consequence of looking at reality from this very limited perspective is that once we have put something in this box, so for instance, if I put in the example that I mentioned earlier, the example in the box of not a good student because he's not wearing fancy clothes and he shows up late, this student can only move within the limits of this tiny small box. So what I want to do here before we continue and to illustrate this point is to ask you to recall a painful event or loss that you've experienced in your life. And if you think about this negative event first focus on the negative consequences. What were the negative aspects of this event and what were the negative things that followed from this event? And I think this is an easy job because, this is something that is very obvious, I guess. But now I would like to ask you to focus on positive aspects and how the experience has benefited you as a person. For instance, how has the experience made you better able to meet the challenges of the future? What did you learn from this experience? How have you changed or grown as a person as a result of the experience? Now, in many cases, we find that even very bad events, even very painful events in life, they're not only bad. We can grow from them. We can develop. We can become stronger, and so on. And in fact, everything contains both sides. And what we do when we judge something, we ignore the endless complexity of a situation. And this is what happens in many cases, of course, with bad situations. We call them bad because we only focus on the negative aspects of the situation. And yes, it's true, there may be very negative consequences. But as is the case with everything, by only focusing on the dark part, you miss the light part. And this is what we refer to as post-traumatic growth in the literature. This means that many people who have suffered in life, when time passes, they're able to look back and say, okay, this was horrible, but at the same time, it has helped me as a person. It has helped me to appreciate the people that I love in life. It has helped me to make choices. It helped me to understand that I'm stronger than I was before, and so on. So this is an example of how a person becomes able to see both sides of the story. And by focusing on a very small part of it, by judging it as wrong, we miss the other half. And I think another example, a beautiful example of how our judgments limit reality and not reflect the complexity of reality is by examining what is true in general. We all have like certain beauty ideals. And when we focus on beauty ideals in Renaissance, there was the beauty ideal was rounded body, full hips, a completely different image of beauty than what we see today. Today the image of beauty is skinny, flat stomach, and so on. So why am I using this example? To show you that cultural norms and all kinds of beliefs that we have, they shape the judgments that we make. And they do not reflect objective reality. A thin person is objectively seen not more beautiful than a well-rounded body. And all these things, they show us that it's a matter of relativity. And by judging something, we miss the whole point. But the same applies to another example that is about cultural differences. In collectivistic cultures, the community is perceived as the most important. In individualistic cultures, the individual is most important. So you can imagine that a person who grows up in an individualistic culture and, grows up believing that, personal development is the most important thing, and so on, when he is confronted with a person from a collectivistic culture, he may judge this person. And he may say, oh my God, look at him. He's so not autonomous. He's so much focusing on the others. He should focus more on personal development and so on, because those are the values and the norms that he grew up with. So this is the basis of his judgment. But on the other hand, a person from a collectivistic culture may look at somebody from an individualistic culture and say, my God, he's so concerned with himself. Why is he not devoting more attention to the family and his community and so on? And he may judge this person in a completely different way. So these examples show that what we perceive as truth and judge as being truth is actually often far from it. So in this final chapter, we're going to focus on the last characteristic of judgments, namely creating conflicts. So what judgments do, they automatically create conflicts. So many judgments, they are actually at the root of the conflicts that we experience in life. I think a nice way to illustrate this is by means of an example. So imagine if you feel something that is, unpleasant. For instance, you feel sadness. What happens often automatically is that we judge this. So a judgment automatically follows. It says, this feeling is bad, I shouldn't feel this way, and so on. So as a result of this judgment, there is an immediate tendency to focus on how life should be, what I should feel in this moment. So in other words, the judgment that occurs as a result of the feeling creates a conflict between what I am experiencing sadness and what I should feel. So because this discrepancy, because of this conflict, we are actually very motivated to do something about it. And this is why this session about judgment is followed by a session on acceptance. Because it is this very process that you see here that often motivates us to suppress negative feelings or modify them, and so on. So the conflict that we experience is nothing more than the product of the mind judging whatever we feel as not being okay. So what is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is actually becoming aware of the judgment. And by becoming aware of the judgment, you create room for something else. But because the automatic judgment takes place, because automatically we feel this isn't okay, I should do something about it, and we think about what life should look like and what I should experience, we enter like a solving mode. But mindfulness makes you very aware of this process and takes a step back and says, okay, so what am I doing here? How am I treating this feeling? Am I allowing myself to feel this, or am I judging this very feeling as not okay or not so good? So mindfulness is about paying attention to judgments. It's not about not judging anymore, but in the first case, it's about becoming aware of judgments. When we take the earlier mentioned example, mindfulness is again all about becoming aware of judgment. When this person is judging the other person being a loser, this is an automatic process, and it's really hard to counteract this. But by becoming aware of the fact that he's judging this, that there is a judgment going on in his mind, he may take a step back and realize this, oh my God, I'm just putting this person in a small little box, and deliberately choose to approach the person in a new and open way, like the open awareness that we talked about in the first session. So mindfulness is about becoming aware of the judgments that we have. So what a mindful person does is, first of all, he is aware that he's judging. It doesn't mean he's not judging anymore, but he's very aware of the process. And he is also aware that his judgments and reality are two completely different things. Third of all, he does not judge himself for judging. Most of the time when people become aware of this process, they notice how much they actually judge during the day, and they become angry at themselves, saying, oh my God, I'm judging all the time, and then they start punishing themselves, and so on. So they're judging themselves for judging, which is paradoxical, of course. You end up in more judgment. So don't judge yourself for judging. It's an automatic process. Just let go of it. Just observe that it happens, that's it, period. Fourth of all, a mindful person can step out of judgment by entering the present moment again. So by observing judgments, by noticing them but not paying too much attention to them and realizing that they're just products of the mind and of certain cultivated norms, you can come in contact again with the present moment and approach it in a way that is less black and white than it was. So you could say ultimately mindfulness can help you to perceive reality more as it is, rather than as the colored version that results from your own beliefs and your own norms. So this is, I think, a byproduct of mindful awareness, that we come in close contact with reality as it is, and not as we wish or believe it should be. Thanks for your attention.